Hello people on my phone, welcome back. Welcome to another reading vlog. Thought it could be fun to have a reading vlog dedicated to one book, especially if the book is long and life-changing. I'm currently reading East of Eden by John Steinbeck for the first time, and I thought it'd be so much fun to have my first initial thoughts on this book documented. I'm only 35 pages in, so I don't have loads of thoughts so far. I'm about to go to a cafe and try and read a decent chunk. I'm so excited to be reading this. I am now 100 pages into East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I thought I could tell you roughly how I'm annotating it because I have been quite a lot. I've got themes I'm annotating for, but I've also got at the top some motifs and symbolism and imagery that I'm looking for, which is for potential essays or video essays. These are my themes, of course they match the cover perfectly. I'm doing my memorable and important quotations or passages. So far I've only got one which says, "And he did not know it because he did not know that such things existed, so how could he miss them?" Which I quite like. The other themes I'm tabbing for are capacity for free will and the breaking of generational curses. I think this is primarily it's the overarching theme of the whole novel. This is what everyone talks about. And then doing sibling rivalry and religious implications and the religious allegory of it all with Cain and Abel. So at the moment we're looking at Charles and Adam, but then I think it goes on to a second generation of siblings with the same initials. Then the next theme is fatherhood and destructive favoritism, and any of the conflict that is inflicted on the favourite child, which has already been so prevalent in the first 100 pages. And then I'm looking at light versus dark and the physical and spiritual implications of this, which also has been quite interesting but not as prominent as I was expecting. But I think that light versus dark is very inherent when books have religious commentary. And I've got these bigger square tabs which I've got at the top, so I've only got 3. So the darker ones, the first one is actually from the first page. The first and the second line of this novel, this opening paragraph of 3 lines, I was like, I have an essay idea. So this tab is mainly for nature imagery and comparing nature and nature symbolism to narrative theory. Because the first line references valleys and mountain ranges, which immediately made me think of Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came by Robert Browning. I think it could be interesting to look at those texts together to talk about narrative theory and quests and how that's represented in pastoral imagery. So I have another one for that. On page 93 it said, "This ending was no deterrent, no one who is young is ever going to be old." And I think that this looks a lot at the futility of narrative and progression, so that's also something that I'd like to analyse deeper. And then the other tab theme, I had a lot to say about this. So this one is regarding an interaction between Charles and Adam in 73 pages in, so I won't give context because it's kind of a spoiler. But they're talking a lot about love and fighting and jealousy and how these things can induce love. It says, "Maybe love makes you suspicious and doubting and you were fighting for your love." I think that in East of Eden, love is this profound expelling of turmoil and violence, and because it looks so deeply at free will and the capacity for free will, it seems like love is this emotional catalyst for violence. And I said, if love is intrinsic, then is violence fate? It also looks a lot in this book at unreciprocated affection and how this can manifest itself as this destructive violence, especially in terms of the fatherhood and favoritism that I was talking about a minute ago. But it looks a lot in this first half especially that is on this first generation, at the idea of protectiveness and jealousy and how these two things can intertwine but in a good way and a bad. I also looked up theology earlier on, which is derived from Greek, and it's basically this human attempt to articulate understanding of the sacred and the divine. I always love when books and classic literature references different philosophies and theories, because then I can look them up and be like, oh, I know that, I'm really clever now. I have written my ideas for my narrative theory quest pastoral thing in my commonplace because I'd like to research it further. I'm going to London today with Connie. We're going to this magazine book reading thing with Lola Olufemi. I don't know if I'm going to read any of East of Eden. I might just be carrying around this massive book for no reason, but it's going to be a fun day. I have an update for East of Eden. I'm currently 312 pages in, so just about halfway. I like being able to see that I've made this much progress, like I've got this much left. I'm not quite sure when I filmed last, but currently I'm in part 3 of the book. There's a lot of discussion surrounding classic literature and whether or not it's intimidating to get into. And in terms of East of Eden and its intimidatingness, I think that it's intimidating simply for the length and the density of the plot. We're following 2 separate families. Currently I'm finding that the 2 families are intertwined, but that's only because they keep going to the house of one another. At the moment, one of the guys is about to go off on a trip, so at that point I think he's gone. I presume we're going to follow him and him going around with his family, but I don't think we're going to necessarily see the 2 of them interact except for in passing memory. I have found some other bits and pieces that I can use in my essay on narrative theory and the idea of quests, which I have up at the top here. I'm excited to keep reading this. I'm hoping I can maybe get 100 pages read today. But I'm also going to be mood reading my TBR for the next week for a separate reading vlog, so I'm kind of going to balance my reading between 2 books at the moment. But I just wanted to update since I'm halfway through. This is an important moment in the timeline of this vlog. I'm going to read some more. I might even do some research in the meantime on the idea of quests and narratives, and then I'll get back to you when I have some more thoughts. So I've only got this much left. I think it's just over 100 pages left. I don't remember what page I was on when I last gave you a reading update. I'd presume it's somewhere in the 300s. I could give you my thoughts on this, but I just read a really brilliant article on allegory in East of Eden, so I thought I'd talk to you about that instead. In reading this big book like this article is titled, I really want to look at different interpretations. I don't want it to just be that I've read the book and then I can put it away. I want to be able to talk about it and be eloquent in the way that I'm talking about it as well. The article is called Beyond Eden, Revising Allegory in Steinbeck's Big Book. There were a lot of quotes in this that I really liked and thought were quite interesting. And also when you're reading articles about literary texts and people that are particularly writing about them, because this is from the Steinbeck Review, they have a lot of really interesting context and facts about the writers and the editors and everything that goes on behind the scenes. So it begins by talking about the concept of allegory as a whole. So it says, such a concept of allegory strictly limits the potential interpretations of a text. So it's basically saying that by providing this general and quite explicit outline to the themes of a book and this analytical underlining of the text itself, the writer is then removing any ability for the reader to apply their own subjective interpretations onto the text. And also it goes on to say specifically about East of Eden. East of Eden asks readers to reject the artificial and absolute division of individuals into separate and distinct categories. Because I want to look at this in terms of narrative theory, this curation of archetypes is very integral to that. I feel like this creation of the archetype and the different character types almost lends itself to this like subpar understanding, especially in terms of the emotional depth and the density that these characters have in the story. The article talks a lot about good and evil, and of course that is so important in the book itself with the Cain and Abel dynamic, but it really looks at how these characters aren't explicitly good or bad. There is intention behind all of their actions, and at the moment of course we're looking at Aaron and Cal rather than Adam and Charles. But we're looking at how different characters with his names, and of course the father/grandfather was called Cyrus, so he's got the C name. I'm really intrigued as to how this is going to progress and see how these characters take on these different names. I think it's quite interesting as well in this dynamic that Kathy has gone to Kate, so she's gone from the C that is kind of perceived as this evil of the two, but she's turned it into the physically and phonetically, I suppose, harsher letter. So she has got free will, but she's using it badly. And the fact that she's taking this inherently, if you can say inherently, evil thing and making it worse, as opposed to these other characters that have this innate evil in them, and they're considering their actions and saying, I don't want to be evil, it just, certain actions will spark or spike a certain emotion in them and they can recognize it. And I think that recognition is so interesting when you're looking at fate and free will, if you can recognise that something is bad, at what point does it become not bad anymore? From reading this article, these are definitely ideas and analysis that I'm going to take into consideration reading this final 100 pages. I finished reading this a few days ago and then promptly forgot to film a clip with my final thoughts. Still now I'm struggling to put my response to this book into words. It's something that I'm not going to be able to articulate now. It's going to be something further along the line in a week or so when I've gathered my thoughts a little bit better. The reason I remember to film this today is because I went on this like little hike by myself, but I had to drive through the lanes, and as terrible as the lanes are to drive in, British countryside is so picturesque, and it's exactly what I was imagining whilst reading East of Eden. You're just driving through these small rickety little roads, and there's hills on either side and massive fields that just expand beyond as far as you can see. And at the moment half of the fields are like dead, like the grass on them is more of a yellowy tone, which again, that sort of dead pastoral imagery is exactly what I imagined when reading like Southern Gothic lit fics or East of Eden or anything with that aesthetic and that vibe. So I remembered to film my thoughts on this. Like I said, I don't actually have thoughts. I will say that in terms of the classic genre, I saw a video and I think I've got it reposted on my book talk, and it says like when the classic reminds you why it's considered a classic. I think East of Eden is a brilliant example of something that is such a perfectly crafted story to mimic humanity at any point. Although it's loosely based on this religious allegory, there is constantly going to be commentary on humanity and how humanity is acting at that present moment, regardless of when that present moment is. I think that the tone of the final 30 pages or so, at that point I could have read another 100 pages. Like the aftermath of the final 3 pages, I could have read so much more about that. And then having a book that is not only 600 pages but following multiple families and following so many different characters, to interweave all of those storylines and to have something be finalised for each individual character and each individual plotline, very masterfully crafted. I've now put my theme pages in the front, so I've got all of my things I've been tabbing and annotating for. You can't really see my tabs, to be fair, but you can see them better like that. But it's one that I'd like to go back to with my thoughts like pre-programmed in my mind. I think I might do a media journal page on the aesthetics of the book and the value, because like I said, I think in one of the very first clips of this vlog, looking at the pastoral imagery and quests and narrative theory is something that I want to look into more. But in finishing this book, that means that this reading vlog is also concluded. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you like the format of one video for one book. Also let me know if you've read East of Eden, because I feel like it has a continual like resurgence on the internet where someone reads it and then suddenly everyone's reading it. So I'd love to have conversations about East of Eden. And again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next reading vlog. Bye!